Hello Figaro fans, peace and love, welcome to the Figaro shop. Today I'm going to be showing you how to overhaul the front brakes and the back brakes on your Figaro. Now you know that the brakes on the car are inherently often not very good, so we're going to show you how to fit the bits and also bits to put into place to try and make them a little bit better. So come and have a look. This is what we're going to be using today. I'm going to be working with Matt to do this. We've got a set of discs and a set of pads. I'm going to show you the fronts first. We've got a pick, 14mm socket, big set of grips, some copper grease, some cloth, and then we've got a blade and some Scotch-Brite. So let's get stuck in. So the first step is to just use the socket and remove the caliper. 2 bolts and it comes off. It's going to need a little bit of a wiggle to get it out. Once it's out, we can remove the pads. Again, just a wiggle, they slot in, and remove the 2 shims that go with them. Then we also need to get the disc off as well. You can see we're just going to give it a bit of a knock. Nothing holding it in place, just a bit of rust and road dirt. Then we remove the rubber sleeves, the rubber grommets and the slider from the caliper. This is important, we need to clean them up. So here they are on the table. We give them a clean up with some brake cleaner, and then just on the sliders we're going to put a little bit of high temperature copper grease. If these don't slide, the pads are going to wear out unevenly. Inside the caliper we use the pick to clean out this groove, and then insert the sliders and make sure they're running nicely back and forth. This really makes a huge difference to the way the brakes perform. Once it's back in place and we've got the grommets and the sliders back in and working nicely, we need to recoil the piston inside the caliper. So that's what the big grips are for. The new pads are going to have more meat on them, so we just need to slide the piston back in a little bit. So Matt's just gently squeezing on it. Now that he's done that, it's time to prepare the pads. We'll clean up the surface, the mating surface for the disc, and get that in place. Always remembering to give the disc a clean up. It'll have a tiny bit of oil on it from the factory just to stop it rusting, so definitely use some brake cleaner. You can see here we're just cleaning up the mounts for the shims that hold the discs in place. If you get the rust off, the fit is going to get better. There's going to be less knocking when you press the brake and less squeal. Once these are both in place, it's a tiny little bit of copper grease just on the end of the pads, and they'll slot into position. The disc doesn't lock or bolt into position, the pads will just hold it in place. You can see it's a little bit of a balancing act getting it all together. Now it's in place, it's just a case of wiggling the caliper over the new discs. As long as we've pushed back the piston far enough, it will slot in with just a wiggle. And then it's just a case of putting the bolts back in place and tightening those up. Again, it always takes a bit of a wiggle and a shuffle to get this started. Right guys, so we're on to the backs. Come and have a look. This is what we've got to do it with. So we've got a new set of shoes, a shoe fitting kit, we've got the copper grease and a hammer, some picks, screwdrivers, and a couple of sets of pliers. We'll show you some other bits that you need to check that will be useful when we're doing the job. So let's jump onto it and see what Matt's doing. So the first thing we're going to do is get the drum off. Make sure the handbrake's off inside the car and give the drum a tap. It will always be a little bit stuck in place. Then it's a case of removing the old shoes. You can see we're using a screwdriver to release a number of springs that are holding the shoes in place. We've also got the pins and springs that hold the shoes in, and you'll see these a little bit better in a second when we're on the workbench. But as we release them, the shoes will actually start to lift out and we can take the last springs off. We've got the same spring clip on the other side. This is the trailing shoe and it will come out with the adjuster arm on it. This is the adjuster. As the shoes come out and you release the springs from behind the hub like this, just keep them all together. It gives you a record of where parts go. The last bit is just removing the handbrake cable there, which just slips out. Before we fit the new shoes, we're just going to check the cylinder. So we're checking the movement and then pulling back the rubber sheath and just making sure that there's no evidence of fluid under there. If there is, you'd need to change the cylinder as well. So you can see things a little bit better now they're laid out on the table. Although they look the same, it's important that you keep the shoes as the leading and trailing edges. The trailing edge is the one with the arm on it that we're just going to strip down now. Some of the parts need to be reused. So you can see this is a bit fiddly to get apart, and although it looks complicated, the best tip I can give you is do one side at a time, and then if you get stuck, you just go back and look at the other side on the car. The little horseshoe clips will come off either with a pair of pliers or a pick like Matt's using here. Once we've got everything apart, we need to clean it all up. As I said a minute ago, I'll stress to ensure that you use exactly the same leading and trailing shoe. They look the same, almost, but they're not. The friction material's in a different position and the brakes won't work very well if you put them on back to front. So now with all the parts removed, we'll give those a clean up. Put some grease on the adjuster and then start to put everything back together on the new set of shoes. It's a little bit fiddly to get these bits back on, but you just need to persevere and have patience. Once they've been reassembled, it's time to put them back together. Starting with the trailing shoe and connecting the handbrake cable as the first task. So we'll get the shoe roughly in position, and then it's time to put the pin and spring clip in place to hold it in. Now these are fiddly to get in. You just hold the pin with your finger from the back and then push and twist the clip into place while compressing the small spring. It's fiddly, but there's nothing that complicated. The next thing we do is put the adjuster in place. This will play a key part later. Make sure you adjust it all the way clockwise so that the new shoes fit. We just use a screwdriver to give it a last little nudge and get it in place. Now we've got the leading shoe. We'll connect first the spring at the top. Which might need a little bit of encouragement just to get it across and get it joined on to the locating spot on the trailing shoe. You can see here we're just using some leverage from a screwdriver. Once that's in place, the shoes will hang in place. We can do the same thing with the spring at the bottom. And everything's in place. We've got the pin on the leading shoe, which is the same job as on the trailing shoe. Again, a bit fiddly. But now that's locked in place. Now we're underneath the car by the fuel tank, and we're just going to release and free off the handbrake cable. This is just while we get everything set up. So once that's done, we can put the drum back on and we can check for resistance moving it back and forth. You want to feel a little bit of resistance. So if we put it on and there's nothing there, we just go through to the little adjuster toothed wheel, which you can get to behind the hub here, and we just twist it and listen for the clicks, and that's slowly opening the shoes up. We play with that for a little while until we get a nice bit of resistance and then readjust the handbrake cable. Right guys, so that's it. Your new brakes are all on your Figaro. The only final thing to do is check the fluid where you've squeezed the caliper in at the front. You probably lost a little bit of fluid from the reservoir here. You just need to top that up with some .4 brake fluid, and then that's it. Give the car a bit of a drive up the road, be really gentle on the brakes to start with. If you need to readjust the backs, you can do that again after you've tested it. And that's it, you're good to go. Cheers guys, see you later.